and welcome to the 10th episode of Giles and Phil, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any elements that have parallels with gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm filmmaker and cyber terrorist, guilty of virtually every computer crime we have a law for, Giles Goff.
And I'm photographer and some of the remainder of an unbalanced equation, Phil Coleman.
And during this lockdown, we'll be trying to hold off the desire to meet in groups of 6 by sticking on our film Cyberpunk sunglasses to analyse the Matrix trilogy. Phil, who's your favourite character from The Matrix?
It's going to have to be Agent Smith. There's something quietly inhuman about him. Yeah, he's also sort of got a bit of a sick sense of humour as well. Every time I see Hugo Weaving in anything, I just think, Mr. Anderson. And that's all I can think of in my head.
It makes it even more confusing when he's Elrond in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
you know?
I see him as Elrond, and I'm just kind of like, it's another simulation.
For me, it always has to be Morpheus. He's cool, he's measured, he's zealous, he's unflappable. He has the kind of faith I want. He can appeal to people who have different beliefs to him, but there's nothing that changes his views, and I just think he's so fantastic.
He's just so staunch in his beliefs. That is admirable.
Absolutely. Without further ado, let's hear Phil's facts.
The Matrix is a 1999 science fiction action film, written and directed by the Wachowskis. It stars Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, Hugo Weaving and Joe Pantoliano in the first installment of the Matrix franchise. It depicts a dystopian future in which humanity is unknowingly trapped inside a simulated reality, the Matrix, created by intelligent machines to distract humans whilst using their bodies as an energy source. When computer programmer Thomas Anderson, under the hacker alias of Neo, uncovers the truth, he is drawn into a rebellion against the machines, along with other people who have been freed from the Matrix. Legendary Hong Kong stunt coordinator Wu Ping Yuen initially refused to work on the film. Even after receiving the script, which he liked, he hoped that by asking for an exorbitant fee, it would turn off the Wachowskis. It didn't. He next formulated what he considered an impossible request. He said that he'd agree only if he had complete control of the fight and that he trained the actors for 4 months before they shoot. Naturally, the Wachowskis complied with his request. So that guy was doing everything he could to not work on the Matrix, and they were just like, yeah, we're definitely having you. We are defo having you. All the scenes that take place within the Matrix have a green tint, as if watching them through a computer monitor, while scenes in the real world have a blue tint. Blue was also used at a minimum in the Matrix scenes, since the directors thought blue was more of a real-world colour, despite, ironically, blue being the least often occurring colour in nature.
I did not know that.
I didn't either until I looked that up, to be fair. Also, as well, any time that they're in the construct or in any training program or anything like that, it's tinted yellow because it is neither the Matrix nor the real world.
Right, okay.
Interesting stylistic choices there, I think. After the lobby shootout, the camera pans back, showing the aftermath of the gunfight in the lobby. During this, a piece of one of the pillars falls off. This happened by coincidence during the filming. It was not planned, but was left because it seemed appropriate. According to costume designer Kim Barrett, Trinity's costume was made with cheap PVC because of the much tighter budget. Similarly, Neo's coat wasn't actually a very expensive fabric. It was a wool blend purchased for $3 a yard. So that means you could get a wool blend for $3 a yard, Giles, patron saint of jackets, and make your own.
Good to know.
When Neo gets in the car with Trinity for the first time, Switch refers to him as Copper Top. Copper Top is a slang for the Duracell battery, which is the battery Morpheus shows to Neo as he explains how the human race became an energy source.
Oh, brilliant. I was wondering about that.
I never understood that line until I read that, and I was like, mind blown.
Because you just spend your time thinking, but he's not ginger, though. Not by any
that's
stretch
what
of the
I thought.
imagination.
Yeah, he's like, but he's not got red hair. Don't make a blind bit of sense, that.
That is fantastic.
Will Smith was approached to play Neo, but turned down the offer in order to star in Wild Wild West in 1999. He later admitted that, at the time, he was not mature enough as an actor, and that if given the role, he would have messed it up. He had no regrets, saying that Keanu was brilliant as Neo.
I've seen interviews about Will Smith saying this, and he's got such grace and warmth about it. And another thing he points out was, and if I had got the role of Neo, they would have had to give the role of Morpheus to Val Kilmer, because you couldn't have 2 black men on screen at any one time. And to be honest with you, I love Keanu Reeves in it, but for me, it's Lawrence Fishburne's performance that really makes it, that really holds it together.
Yeah. I love Keanu Reeves. I really do. I wouldn't say he's the greatest actor on the planet, but he does certain characters brilliantly.
Yeah.
Whereas Lawrence Fishburne, obviously a lot more experience and a lot...
The distinction I would make is I'd say that Keanu Reeves is a movie star and Lawrence Fishburne is an actor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do get that, actually, yeah.
It's a subtle distinction, but it's there.
In the first 45 minutes of the film, Neo has 80 lines. 44 of these lines are questions, just over half his total dialogue, averaging at roughly one question per minute. I just imagine him just being like, what? You know? Whoa. Numerous sets of identical twins were cast as extras in The Woman in Red scene, in which Morpheus takes Neo through a computer simulation of the Matrix to create the illusion of a repeating program. For example, the tall man with slick back hair and sunglasses in the opening shot is seen a few seconds later as a police officer writing a parking ticket.
Oh, wow.
So apparently they just got loads of twins in just to make it look as if it's like repeating pieces of code.
Like Mouse has used the same code and did a copy and paste several times.
Yeah.
I think that's,
basically,
that's brilliant.
For Keanu Reeves' scenes set in the Matrix at the start of the film, his costumes were deliberately shabby and ill-fitting to suggest Thomas Anderson's feeling of not quite fitting into the world. The actors and actresses of the film were required to be able to understand and explain the Matrix. Simulacra and simulation was required reading for most of the principal cast and crew.
Sorry, that's a key postmodern text, isn't it?
I believe so, yeah, and also it is featured in the film. That scene where that guy comes to get that piece of code off him and he calls him his own personal Jesus Christ. He hides all of his stuff in a copy of it.
Oh, fantastic. Basically, it's the idea that a simulation or a copy of something can become sort of more real to us than the original thing, if you like. It's a key thing. You can find references to it in Blade Runner and Matrix and all manner of other texts.
Absolutely applies to this film as well.
Yeah.
Keanu Reeves stated that the Wachowskis had him read Simulacra and Simulation, Out of Control, and Evolutionary Psychology even before they opened up the script, and eventually he was able to explain all the philosophical nuances involved. Carrie-Anne Moss commented that she had difficulty with this process. I can imagine so.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, that is brilliant. No, I think that's a key thing that we've learned with filmmaking is you've got to make sure that everybody is on the same journey as you. Everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet and they understand what you're after. I mean, I have never set quite a hefty required reading for any of my films, but that's a really nice touch.
Yeah, no, I like the fact that they wanted everyone to be on the same page, almost literally, and I think that's quite interesting. In the combat training program before Neo starts his furious attacks on Morpheus, he rubs his nose with his thumb and finger, similar to a mannerism of Bruce Lee before he attacks his opponents. The move was improvised by Reeves. In the early stages of developing what was to become the famous bullet time sequence, visual effects supervisor John Gator and director of photography Bill Polk constructed many gimbals and dollies in the hope of creating the effect the old-fashioned way. The original dolly they created for the camera would be led around the action at a tremendous speed, but after many failed tests and many broken dollies, they adopted for computer graphics, which meant writing an entirely new program for the effect. However, the bullet time sequence does use one very old-fashioned technique, still photography.
Yeah.
I remember watching a documentary about the way they did it, and they've got all those cameras that just go around in a big arc around. I was just fascinated by it. That's amazing.
Well, thank you for those, Phil. I really appreciated them.
No
now,
problem.
to talk to us about Plato's Cave and all things philosophical, I am very excited to introduce our special guest, who I had such a great time talking to earlier this week.
Hi, I'm Natalie Austin, a teacher from Kidderminster. I'm a psychology teacher by training, but kind of fell into teaching religious studies 8 years ago. I'm also a keen amateur philosopher and a Matrix fangirl.
Natalie, it is an absolute privilege to finally have you on the podcast.
I'm so excited too.
Awesome sauce. So, what elements of philosophy can we find in the Matrix trilogy?
For many people, myself included, the Matrix was kind of their introduction to philosophy. So one of the key philosophical questions at the heart of at least the first Matrix film is, what is reality? I'm probably not alone in having come out of the first movie thinking, firstly, it is absolutely imperative that I buy a leather trench coat. But secondly, how can I know I'm not in the Matrix right now? Now, that's not exactly an original thought, but if anyone has ever had that thought, well, how do I know that I'm not in the Matrix right now? Congratulations, you are a philosopher, because that is exactly what philosophers do. So the Wachowskis, they're not the first to pose this question, but you can argue the way in which they did pose it was the coolest and the most accessible. You know, classical philosophy is, you know, there's not enough gun battles, to be honest, in there.
I could not agree more.
Yeah, you know, Plato's Republic, no fight scenes at all.
Yeah, I mean, Aristotle's chase scenes are brilliant, but really that's all he's got. You know?
Exactly. So how do you know that you are not in the Matrix, Giles?
That is a very good question, because, as you know, I already have the leather trench coats, so in fact, if anything, I'm more inclined to think that I am in the Matrix.
Yeah, but there is no way around it, really. Like, there is nothing you can do to prove that you're not in the Matrix. I mean, I've sort of made peace with it a long time ago, because I think if this is the Matrix, if I'm in some sort of simulation, well, I can't get out of it, and it's quite a nice simulation, so just enjoy it, I suppose.
I was just going to say, we accept the reality that's put in front of us.
Exactly. This idea of, you know, the world being some sort of illusion, it's not a new idea. It wasn't invented in the 70s. Probably the most famous person that came up with this idea was René Descartes back in the 1630s. Descartes was a philosopher, mathematician, scientist, just general all-around badass. He was awesome.
I think that says more about your relationship with philosophy than anything else.
Philosophers are like, they're warriors of the mind. And he argued that the only thing that you can be certain of is that your mind exists, because everything else could be illusion. But if there is a mind that is thinking about whether things are an illusion, then you know that that mind exists. And he was summed up in this famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So, you know, nothing else might be real, but you know at least one thing, that your mind exists. Your body might not exist, but your mind exists.
Okay.
And so that was kind of like the most famous version of that thought. Another question for you. Are you familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave?
I am, but I always love to hear you tell it.
So Plato was a Greek philosopher. He lived about 400 years BC. And this is probably one of his most famous works. Anyone who knows the word Plato may know about the allegory of the cave. So in this famous allegory, he described a group of prisoners who had lived their entire lives chained up in a cave facing a wall. These people spend their lives watching the shadows moving on the wall. These are shadows cast by people and objects moving past the entrance of the cave. Now, for the people in the cave, the shadows are all they know. And to them, the shadows are their reality. They have no idea that there is a world outside. One day, a prisoner escapes from the cave, and he is able for the first time in his life to perceive true reality. You might start here seeing some similarities here to the Matrix. He can see that the shapes that he had thought were his reality are just shadows cast by the real world. And now he understands the real world, he would be unable to return to the cave and be content with the world of shadows. Also, if this prisoner were then to go back into the cave and try to explain the real world to the prisoner still inside, they would find his descriptions incomprehensible. I mean, how do you explain sunlight to someone who's lived in darkness? Plato argues that once the prisoner has seen the real world, they would feel compelled to rescue others from the cave and to bring them out into the light. But some of the prisoners inside the cave may fight and resist anyone who tries to take them from the cave. To them, the shadows are their reality, and they would resist someone trying to take them away from that. So Plato originally intended this allegory to be representing the role of the philosopher. So the philosopher is the person who is able to escape from the cave and see the real world of pure fact and pure logic. Obviously, the hero of Plato's story is going to be a philosopher because he was the philosopher. But it's clear that the Wachowskis were really heavily influenced by this allegory and how they wrote The Matrix. So to the people still hooked up to The Matrix, they're the prisoners tied up in the cave.
Yeah.
And The Matrix itself is the shadows on the wall that people perceive to be reality. Morpheus alludes to this. He says it's the world that's been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. And much like Plato's prisoner, you cannot have the truth explained to you because Morpheus says you have to see it for yourself. And once people are freed from the Matrix, they are then confronted with the world outside, and they understand. They understand the truth of the life they thought they'd understood. And also in the world of the Matrix, those who've been unplugged, the ones who, have left the cave, they work to liberate the people still inside, just like the prisoner is compelled to help those still inside the cave. And like the prisoners who resist freedom, Morpheus explains to Neo, and I'm quoting him here, you have to understand most of these people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so inured, so hopelessly dependent on the system, they will fight to protect it. And we also see in Cypher the situation of the prisoner who is unable to return to life in the cave. So Cypher has left the cave. He's seen the real world, he took the red pill, and now he's cursed with that knowledge. And the only way you could return to a happy cave existence is to have all your knowledge of the real world erased. The Wachowskis are clearly philosophy nerds, and personally I think they've done an absolutely brilliant job of making quite complicated philosophical ideas very accessible, and with gun battles and bullet time. So literal books have been written about it.
How does the film tackle other religions?
I mean, obviously there are parallels to Christianity, but I'm going to leave that to you guys to discuss.
Much appreciated.
But the Wachowskis were actually also heavily influenced by Eastern religions. I don't just mean like digital dojos and stuff like that, but the religions of Hinduism and Buddhism particularly, and especially in the second and third films there are lots of references to sort of Hindu and Buddhist beliefs. In the second film we are told by the architect that Zion has been destroyed and rebuilt many times. Now in Hinduism you're probably familiar with the concept of reincarnation, that you live, you're born, you live, you die, and then your soul is reincarnated into another body, and you're born, you live, you die again. Many Hindus also believe that a similar cycle happens to the universe, that we are actually living in a cycle of universes that are created, exist, and then are destroyed and then recreated. So each universe starts off harmonious but then gradually declines to the point where it needs to be renewed. And there are three gods who are responsible for this cycle, and they're referred to as the Trimurti. There's Brahma, who's the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. One academic article I read suggested that these three gods are actually represented in the Matrix by the Indian family that are waiting at the train station in the last film. Wow. Because their names and the descriptions of the characters do seem to map onto the Trimurti. So, for example, the dad, I think, is called Rama, and Rama is the name of an avatar, an incarnation of Vishnu, and Vishnu being one of the Trimurti. So it's a really interesting little sort of nod to it there. I mean, again, there's so many references to Hinduism and Buddhism. I think there's even one of the ships is called the Brahma. So there's an awful lot of Hinduism in there. They really went to the religion and philosophy pick and mix when they were
do you know what? That is a wonderful phrase, because that's how I'd sum it up. They pick bits over here and there and everywhere. I love it so much as a result.
And that's why we religious studies teachers absolutely love The Matrix too. There's always a good clip you can show to the students.
That is fantastic. My final question, what would you say has been the lasting cultural impact of The Matrix?
The Matrix has had a huge impact on popular culture. Every single action film in the early noughties had a scene where they use bullet time. I even saw it in a Harvester advert once. But it's had a big impact on our language as well. One particular thing that I really wanted to point out is really amuses me how the alt-right have hijacked this term red pill.
How would you describe the alt-right?
The alt-right are groups who they hold deeply misogynistic, racist, white supremacist ideology. They believe that, women and liberal politics and minorities are somehow oppressing men and oppressing white people. So it's a very strange ideology. They have taken the phrase red pill and they have sort of hijacked that term, and they have made it to mean people who are able to see the truth. So once you come to the realisation that the poor white man is being oppressed by women and minorities, so once you've woken up to the truth, you have taken the red pill, which is absolutely idiotic. But anyway, so what I find really amusing about the fact that the alt-right have chosen that particular term from this particular movie is that they've kind of missed the point. One popular Yeah, I know. Who'd have thought it? They're otherwise such reasonable people. But one popular interpretation of The Matrix is that it can be read as an allegory for the experience of being transgender. Now, I'm not trans myself, so I did a bit of research into how trans people themselves interpret Neo's journey. So, for example, Neo, right from the beginning of the film, he rejects his given identity of Mr. Anderson, and he embraces his chosen identity of Neo. Morpheus talks to Neo about his feeling of having a splinter in his mind, a feeling that just something isn't quite quite right. And that is a feeling that a lot of trans people have said that they can appreciate in their own lives, of that feeling before they sort of realise that they are transgender, that something isn't right. Agent Smith talks to Neo about his dual lives and how one has a future and the other does not. That's my terrible impression there. But I mean, there's so many more examples. It's really not a massive leap to see The Matrix as a trans allegory, because I don't know if people are aware, Lana and Lily Wachowski themselves are trans women. And so it's not out the realm of possibility that they wrote the trans allegory deliberately.
They were men when they directed the film.
Yeah, they identified publicly as men at the time, but were, I don't know their story, but I imagine very likely that they did that deliberately, I'd imagine. So when the alt-right, a group famously opposed to trans rights and feminism, adopt the language of the Matrix by talking about taking the red pill, they are actually speaking the progressive language of two trans women. And for some reason, that makes me super happy.
That is fantastic. Natalie, I am so pleased we managed to get you on the podcast at some point. This has been one of the most enjoyable interviews we've had.
I could keep on going, but you probably, have...
Save it for your own philosophy podcast.
Yeah. Coming soon.
I should also point out that Natalie is also our waffle editor for this podcast, so she's got the unenviable task of listening to herself later on and working out which bit's a total waffle.
Yeah.
Awesome sauce. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
That was Natalie's interview. Phil, what did you think?
I wish I had the pleasure of her company much more often so I could talk more about The Matrix and philosophy, because she seems to have done her reading.
Absolutely. Natalie is one of the most knowledgeable people I know, and it was an absolute joy to speak to her about something that she is clearly passionate about.
Oh, absolutely. With, Plato's allegory of the cave, which I had to look up, but it makes sense. The bit at the end, when talking about Rama and Vishnu and the people in the train station, would never have known that in a million years, and I feel better for knowing it.
Definitely. And the thing that blew me away the most in this was the idea that the Matrix is an allegory for being trans.
And the fact that those alt-right people took it.
The irony is beautiful. What's interesting is, if you look, Smith tends to refer to Neo almost exclusively as Mr. Anderson, which is the name that he was given, not the name that he chose. Effectively, what he's doing there is he's dead-naming him. Have you heard the process of dead-naming?
Where somebody won't accept the name that the other person is trying to identify as.
Exactly. When somebody has sort of changed gender and someone else keeps referring to them as their old name, and it's a way of trying to put somebody back in their box. At least that's particularly what Smith is doing there. And I just thought, when you see it like that for the first time, it just puts an extra layer to it. And that's the thing I love about this film. You can read it as a Messiah movie for cyberpunks. You can read it as a trans allegory. You can read it as a meditation on fate versus free will. And I just never get bored of finding out more about it.
Yeah, it's so rich, and deeper you dig, the more you find every single time, and it's just beautiful. It's something I could watch over and over and over and over and over, and I have.
Yeah, definitely. Now it's time for Finding the Faith in the Film.
Da-na-na-na-na-na-na!
No!
Hey, I got a backup singer!
Firstly, let's set out some expectations. The Matrix franchise is 3 films, at least 2 computer games, and various short films. If we tried to be comprehensive in our analysis, this podcast would be 15 hours long. These are just my observations. If I've missed anything out, I expect you, the listener, to tell us about them. There is so much in The Matrix that it would be reductive to call it a Christian film. It is not an allegory, although it has allegorical elements. It can be read in many different ways, and we'd encourage you to find out more. But this is a God in Film podcast, so we're going to be looking at it through the prism of a Messiah movie for cyberpunks. We're also not going to be talking about the critical merits of the films. Those are the kind of arguments that have sustained geeks for years. All we'll say is that this is one of the richest texts that cinema has offered us. It is the Hamlet of Hollywood.
I do like that.
Yeah, I was quite chuffed myself with that one. Nice bit of alliteration.
Fair play, fair play.
Let's go through the obvious stuff. I'm going to point out some of the names, and if you can understand the significance, then we'll move straight on. If you're not sure about anything, you let me know and explain them, okay?
Okay.
Obviously, one of the main characters is called Trinity. What can you tell us, Phil?
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it's the Trinity. What about Zion? Have you ever come across that term?
I know of it. I think it might be a prophet of some kind, but I'm not sure.
Less of a prophet and more of a place. So, in Old Testament times, Zion was a synonym for Jerusalem, the idea of a holy city. And In the New Testament, it went on to transform its meaning to become something like a heavenly Jerusalem. Zion could be seen in some contexts as almost a reference to heaven. It's a place where God rules and everything is as it should be.
Oh, I see. I think maybe what I got mixed up with was Sion.
Yeah,
as in, like,
as in the
Sion.
last Sion. Yeah. There are things that we saw in the 20th century about the Zionist movement, and that became about the idea of having Jewish people return to the Holy Land. That is a whole other topic, and we will absolutely not be getting into that discussion here. What about the Nebuchadnezzar?
I remember looking this up years ago. I think it's the name of a king.
You are absolutely right. Well done. It is the name of a Babylon.
I'm so pleased with myself.
Nebuchadnezzar II was a Babylonian king. He conquered Jerusalem. At least if I'm thinking of the right king. He took the Jewish people out of Israel and made them slaves. And he's featured quite heavily in the book of Daniel. I don't know if you're familiar with that one at all. But the book, The Matrix of Philosophy, states that the Nebuchadnezzar's name is symbolically important, as the ancient king has a dream he can't remember but keeps searching for an answer. So this is obviously similar to how Neo continues to search for an answer to his vague but persistent questions about the Matrix.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Like being late at night on his computer and that.
Exactly. And I knew the Nebuchadnezzar was significant, but I couldn't pin down why exactly, so I really enjoyed that.
That's cool.
The Nebuchadnezzar's nameplate, you see it briefly in the first film. It's obviously the Nebuchadnezzar's a hover ship, and the nameplate we see briefly in the film is Mark III, number 11, made in the USA, year 2069. You could read that as Mark chapter 3, verse 11, in which case it writes, "An unclean spirit, when they saw him, fell down before him and cried, 'Thou art the Son of God.'" Now, in some ways, Morpheus parallels a gospel writer because he's delivering news of the Saviour. And that I thought was really interesting as well.
That's a nice touch.
It's a really nice touch. Morpheus is often referred to as like a John the Baptist figure because he believes long before Jesus comes along, John actually is Jesus' cousin. He baptizes him. It's not an exact parallel, but Morpheus sort of baptizes Neo into the world as it is, if you like. So it's a nice parallel with that in that sense. Also, did you notice Niobe in Reloaded and Revolutions? Her ship, the smaller one, the one that Neo flies to the Machine City, is called the Logos. Logos is Greek for the word. The word Logos came to be used to mean the good news, so as in passing on the good news, passing on the gospel.
See. Right.
So much so that there's actually a Christian organisation called Operation Mobilization who have a ship called the Logos that goes around delivering the gospel and doing some humanitarian work around the world. It's really interesting.
I like that.
Let's go on to the meaty stuff.
Whoa.
The central conceit about taking a red pill or a blue pill. Effectively, it's a really nice way to sum up the idea of making a choice. There's that really nice line. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. Similarly, I can't make you believe in God and Jesus and everything else. I can only show you the way. And I thought that was really nice because it links in this idea of choice and Christianity sort of coming together quite a lot. And we've talked about the importance of choice before.
Again, like I've said a couple of times, like you've got to be motivated by your own choice. You've got to make that decision before you can actually be believing what you want to do. You've got to have made the decision first.
Absolutely. And I want to talk briefly about the idea of like different models of church. So, Phil, what does church mean to you?
Church for me can mean two different things, really. Like one of it is literally sort of like the building, but also I think church has got a lot to do with community, a group of people all believing the same thing, all following the same beliefs and ideals and guidelines.
You've hit the nail on the head there in some ways. So in modern society, the church can be seen as different things. So to its critics, it's this massive, monolithic institution bordering on the edge of irrelevance. To its congregation, it can be our main source of community and belonging. And to the world at large, it can serve as a fantastic humanitarian organisation.
Yeah.
Similarly, the church is referred to in different ways in the Bible. In Colossians, they use the metaphor of a body. In Ephesians, it's referred to as the bride of Christ because the idea is we're going to be with Christ forever. I've always thought it's a slightly clumsy metaphor. For a bloke, it's a little bit of an odd one to get your head round. But then again, there's women in church who have to refer to being brothers in Christ, which is always a bit clunky. In 1 Timothy, it's referred to as a family. But in 2 Corinthians 10:3-5, we're referred to as an army. I'll give you the quote. "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ."
That's a lot more organised and slightly a lot more aggressive than I consider Christians. machines. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, and this is the point I'm getting to, is that there are different models of Christianity. There are different ways of looking at it. Some take it quite extreme down that army aspect by things like the Salvation Army, where they all have sort of uniforms and ranks and all the rest of it. And whilst I wouldn't go that far, the metaphor works quite nicely, that we're all people working towards something. I tend to think of my church as my forward operating base. It's where I've been stationed for this time in my life, you know?
I like that. That's a nice little...
My senior pastor is a bit like my captain. You'll sort of do what they ask you to do. Sometimes very flipping grudgingly, I hasten to add, but you still sort of do it, you know?
It's your duty.
And exactly. And if you think about it, the way the military works in the Matrix is kind of a similar thing. It's this sort of model where people are recruited one by one. It's based not on merit but belief. Each crew operates slightly differently with varying degrees of deference to their captains.
Yeah.
And the goal is absolutely the same, the salvation of humanity. And whilst I like that now, at 16 years old, I absolutely loved that. That sense of being part of an army working towards something has always been very appealing. And the important thing is to make sure that if you do think of your church as an army, then you have to be very clear what the enemy is and that it's not people.
How do I even put this? The enemy is... It's like denouncing Christ, basically.
Yeah.
That's kind of the enemy. It's not literally kind of like, you don't believe in Christ, so I'm going to hit you. You know, it's not, it's
exactly.
not that.
And that is the problem we've had to deal with, that people have misinterpreted what God is after. He's not interested in you killing people for him. Doesn't get him anywhere, you know?
No, it don't get anyone anywhere. So
Exactly. So if we fast forward to the end of the first Matrix film, we've got Neo's death and resurrection, where Neo dies in the corridor, and it's traumatic. He clearly has nightmares about it afterwards, and heading up to that point, there's no clue that he would survive it. After this, though, he has powers unlike anything he's had before, and this is kind of reminiscent of Jesus after his resurrection. There's several references in the Gospels of Jesus being different. He tells Mary Magdalene at one point, "Don't touch me," and obviously he's able to appear to people at different places who are miles apart and all the rest of it. And obviously the last thing that happens is that Jesus ascends into heaven. This has parallels with Neo flying at the end of the Matrix, so I just thought that was a really nice parallel there.
I always thought, when I heard that Jesus was ascending into heaven, I genuinely always thought he just kind of went straight into the air, and I was just like, wow, that's amazing. I bet that makes the commute really easy, you know?
I'm going to also jump massively ahead to the end of Revolutions. It's when Neo goes to Machine City.
Yeah.
And can you remember what he does when he gets there?
He talks to the leader of the Machine City, and his name is Deus Ex Machina, the babyface thing.
Really? I didn't know there was a name for that. That name doesn't appear in the script, does it? Oh, sorry,
I
doesn't
don't
appear on
think it
screen.
appears in the film, no. I think it came from, like, concept art, but I think in the
Okay.
script it was probably named that way. I'll have to look that up, though.
So when Neo goes into the Machine City, he meets the, for want of a better word, leader of the machines, and it's the giant baby in the spiky glowing ball thing. And crucially, he asks for peace. Now, this is an absolute game changer. It's not what we're expecting, and it's not what we've had any clues that it's going to happen. Also, it's not the sort of thing that happens traditionally in a big budget blockbuster. The protagonist walks up to the enemy's lair and asks for peace. But this was really fascinating because it made me think completely differently about the machines. In this story, in this allegory, if you like, the machines aren't demons. The machines in themselves aren't inherently evil. The machines are the Romans. So, to give you an idea, there was a lot of expectations that a Messiah would come and liberate the people of Israel. And whenever they were conquered by either the Babylonians or by the Romans or anything, the idea was that this Messiah would come and he would save them in a military overthrow. And that's what people were expecting Jesus to be. And what I find fascinating is Neo is obviously a warrior, he's obviously a very powerful being, but the crucial thing is that he makes peace with the machines, and I found that amazing. It's this idea that both Neo and Jesus, they don't operate out of hatred. At no point can I remember Neo saying he hates the machines, and I found it fascinating because he doesn't defeat an enemy so much as he changes the entire paradigm of reality. And I thought you could apply apply that to both Neo and to Jesus, and I thought that's fascinating.
That is amazing. Just while you
No,
say
go for
that, I just wanted to add a little extra layer. In the Animatrix, specifically, the sort of backstory between the humans and the machines in a very sort of diluted fashion is that the humans created the machines, subjugated the machines, and then the machines decided, you know what, actually, I'm done with this. They basically started a war, blacked out the sky because they were all dependent on solar power.
Well, if you remember, the humans black out the sky because the machines are dependent on solar power at that point.
Yeah. And that's why they basically just go, right, well, we'll use you as batteries then, kind of thing. It's a weird parallel, because the less conquerors, they're more sort of oppressed beings that were trying to overthrow their sort of like oppressors. Yeah.
This whole parallel, the idea that the machines aren't inherently evil, that people can work together with them.
Yeah.
As we see with the Oracle, who's obviously a machine program in herself. And it just made me think about how it's more powerful to defend something you love than to destroy something you hate. And that has been sticking with me for most of the day. And obviously the last thing he does is, as he's dying, he starts to form a cross, and you just get the very clear sort of 1 line, 2 lines as he starts to usher in an area of peace. So in broad strokes, the Matrix is about finding faith. Reloaded is about losing it, and Revolutions is about finding that faith again and having it confirmed. What's interesting for me is that Morpheus, the moment when he sees his ship explode at the end of Reload, he says, I had dreamed a dream, but now that dream is gone for me. And you have to appreciate, as a maybe 19-year-old at this point, when you've only seen The Matrix as being a Messiah movie for cyberpunks, that ending was absolutely heartbreaking. For me, it is one of the most intense endings, up there with Empire Strikes Back. You know, if you think about it, the big twist in Empire is that Darth Vader's his dad. The big twist in Reloaded is that the One and the entire concept of the One is another form of control, and there's nothing to hope for whatsoever, and we should all just give up now, which I feel is a bigger twist.
I remember all the critical reception of that, and everyone was just like, you what? How can you possibly take this away from us? You know?
Yeah, so it's not so much that it's a bad story, it's more that just it hits you so hard, and as a result, it can hit you really hard to then lift you up later on for Revolutions. He's absolutely bereft at that point, and he feels like everything he's believed is a lie. But the thing I find interesting is he keeps on fighting. He doesn't just sort of give up. And for me, it felt like a reminder, a universal reminder for everyone that we should keep on fighting, even when it seems hopeless. And at this particular time in history, that has never been more prevalent in my lifetime.
I completely agree. There are evil forces out there, and they're among us, and they are us, and we've got to have the strength together, whether you are religious or not, to just help out the common person.
Absolutely. That is the end of our Finding the Faith in the Film section.
So I always knew that there was a lot of sort of religious parallels in this film and in the franchise as a whole. It's nice to get a little bit of extra seasoning added on top in terms of context, you know, like I quite enjoy that.
Nice to kind of get into the nitty-gritty on it on some parts.
Absolutely,
isn't it? You know?
I find it fascinating. I really do.
Really nice to do a deep dive. Speaking of deep dives, we had a review came in from Pete Last on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, yes.
Who said, Giles and Phil do a really good job in this entertaining, well-paced and thought-provoking podcast. Too many people think about the links between theology and culture overcomplicate things to such an extent that they often disappear up their own extremities. These two are clearly good mates, and the discussions they have are interesting and down to earth. Give it a listen, which absolutely made me smile.
Thank you so much.
That really made my day when I read that. In terms of shameless plug, we are still looking for volunteers to be part of our test audience for our film Reset. Yep. So if you like sci-fi with a heart and you've got 20 minutes to watch a film and fill out a questionnaire, please do get in contact with us via all the usual social channels, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever works for you.
Carrier pigeon with a scroll.
The scrolls work really well. The last thing to say is that this is the last episode of this series, mainly because I've got to go off and be a dad.
Hey!
My son is...
I'm so happy for you, Giles.
My son is due to arrive in a few weeks' time, and I am reliably informed that babies can be quite time-consuming. We originally planned this as a limited series of 10 episodes, but we've had such a good response that we hope at some point in the future to do a second series. So, if you'd like to hear more, or have any suggestions about what episodes you'd like us to do, please give us a shout out on the socials. All that's left to say is, on behalf of myself and Phil, a big thank you to everyone who has been a guest on the show, every person who has left us a review, and every person who has listened to one or more of our episodes. episodes. We really appreciate you guys.
We're really enjoying doing this during lockdown, and it's given me something to look forward to, and it's helped me to engage my brain at a time when you could just be idle. So
Absolutely.
I've got to say thank you to Giles specifically. So thanks for that.
And I couldn't have done this without you. Anyway, that's enough of that. Thank you guys, and we'll see you sometime soon. Bye.
See you in the future. Bye-bye.
Guardian Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff and Phil Coleman. Mixing by Phil, editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by Julie Walsh, and our theme tune was composed by Rick Lee. Fact-checking by Christina Stannard-Good. Waffle editing by Natalie Austin. Tech support from Claire Goff, and our intern is George Allen. Guardian Film is a DAS production. Please rate and review, unless it's a 1-star. In which case, take the ship and head up to broadcast depth. Meet Phil at the rendezvous point and rant at him there, but beware, the tunnels are crawling with sentinels, so have your EMP ready to go. Good luck.